Every time a civilization reaches the pinnacle of its decadence, we return to restore the balance.
Gotham isn't beyond saving. Give me more time. There are good people here.
You are defending a city so corrupt we have infiltrated every level of its infrastructure.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. Now, I am tallying up the questions for tomorrow's special Comics Aficionados Ask Us Anything panel. I figured because it was Thanksgiving week, there wouldn't be a whole lot of news to talk about, and I was pretty much proven correct. Now, there's a few things that came out, but we weren't going to be able to talk about Luke Cage getting canceled, a month prior to release for 2.5 hours. So I'm glad I did this, but there were a couple of questions in there that I wanted to answer in a full-length video. Everything else should be covered for the most part in tomorrow's Comics Aficionados in one way or another. Actually, there's two questions. One of them will be covered later in the week with Doc and myself. We're going to talk about it together. And then there's this one that was from Tevye Smolka. Funny enough, I was kind of already working on this question, so I was like, well, I'm already prepared for it. Might as well do it. This was the first question he asked. How do you feel about the DC Comics and Marvel Comics' current direction, and how would you fix both universes? Which is the big question what this video is mostly going to be about. He also asked, as a follow-up, is the comic book industry dying? And if so, how would you repair it from the ground up? Or would you say, screw it and restart the comic book industry from scratch? That one I'll actually answer first because it's a little bit more simple. No, the comic book industry is not dying. By all metrics, there's actually significant growth in comic books. If you look at comic books as in, pictures on pages, primarily telling the story with dialogue and stuff like that. In this case, I am counting manga as a form of comic books, and manga readership is growing. And in fact, we have an entire generation of new comic book readers that are being groomed on Dogman and Smile and Captain Underpants and all that stuff, and Mayor Goodboy. So the good thing is we have new readers coming into the industry that are ready to support comics. We've got, obviously a thriving manga circuit that's growing each and every week. The problem is they're not coming into DC and Marvel comics. They're not coming into what we would think of as mainstream comics in the U.S. North American market. Your DC, Marvel, superhero universes, Image Comics, Boom and stuff. Now, there is certainly growth at Boom and maybe even a little bit in some of the other smaller indie publishers, but it's not really being felt in DC and Marvel. It's they cannot crack the code. So no, the comic book industry is not dying. It's changing. It's certainly evolving. Now, can DC and Marvel keep up with it? That's what we're kind of get into here in a second. So he says, would you? How would you repair it? And would you just restart from scratch? No, you cannot restart from scratch, because if you're DC and Marvel, the most important chips that you have to play are all the characters that you already have established that are in movies, television, streaming, and those valuable resources that you had to play those with are the 80 years of stories that have already been written for a lot of these characters. There's 60 years in the case of Spider-Man. So you cannot start from scratch. You just have to understand what the new comic book industry is, how it's evolving, and adapt to it, adapt to the market, or something you don't see from DC and Marvel very often. You need to become a trendsetter yourself. Do something different that changes the market. Go and identify a new consumer base and attack them or target them with a new version of your product that entices them, or even an existing consumer base like the existing manga consumer base, which is growing. See what they're doing and see if you can go over and grab a little bit of that pie. Can they be trendsetters? I don't think so. Can they respond to the market? Not nearly fast enough. That's been quite apparent. So the way I personally think that you could fix both before that, how do you feel about the direction of DC and Marvel Comics universes? I'm not hopeful. In fact, I'm not optimistic at all. I'm quite cynical. I am thinking cynical on this one. I think DC Comics are making an enormous mistake following down the path that our Marvel already failed with, within the last decade. This is a terrible decision. to spite your fans, to spite your readership, to push through with an agenda that's has nothing to do with entertaining your customers or getting your customers to buy more comic books. They are trying to replace their existing consumer base with new, better thought of customers. No one's ever been able to do that successfully. So I think their direction is woefully misguided and doomed to fail, just like it did with Marvel, who even has more high-profile, comic characters within the mainstream media right now. Everybody knows who the Avengers and all those characters are. So I think DC is playing with fire, and they're obviously going to get burned. They are Wile E. Coyote with a stick at Acme dynamite, just bound to blow up in their faces. As far as Marvel Comics, they're so scatterbrained, it's not even funny. You can't count on Marvel to do anything these days other than restart, reboot, event. Nothing feels important. Why invest in anything? If you don't think these things are important, how can I invest in these things and think they're important myself? Obviously, Marvel also has some flavor of what DC Comics are doing wholesale, but they're doing it at a smaller scale. And quite frankly, I don't think either Marvel or DC are courting the best comic book talent, whether they be writers and artists. Certainly, they have very good talent at the very top, but there's plenty of comic book writers and artists that aren't associated with Marvel and DC that are not associated with them at all right now. That probably would work for them. They offer them the right gig at the right price, but they're not offering those things right now. And perhaps they don't even want to talk to those people. And that's why DC and Marvel Comics, in a nutshell, those are the things that I think about those universes that are going in the wrong path. Now, how would I fix it? That's very complicated. You have long-term strategies, medium-term strategies, short-term solutions. You got things that you could do at the executive leadership, more of an operational leadership, and as far as changes you can do with talent, editorial staff, and all that kind of stuff. If you want to change the culture of a company or a team, if you want to say, and you want to change it like for good, that change has to come up from the top. But those changes take a really long time. You have to have a new boss come in, set a new tempo, kind of change out some parts and whatnot. And eventually over time, as people get adjusted to that boss, the new leadership, i.e. a change in a CB Cebulski or a Jim Lee, it'll happen, but it takes a while. And you could even go up higher than that with a Kevin Feige. Obviously, he's the chief creative officer of all Marvel. You could do it over at Warner Brothers. Their structure is a little bit different. You could replace all the writers and stuff, but even then, I think you would still have a lot of the issues that you have today, because I think those people would be directionless. The thing that Marvel and DC that could do today that we would see immediate dividends, we would see a tremendous increase in the quality of the product and the production that's going through, and we would also see a lot of these bums, these D-list writers that are never going to make it in today's industry. We would probably find out that there's quite a few of them that could be good writers with good direction. If DC and Marvel made wholesale changes immediately with their group editorial staff. At Marvel, I call them the Legion of Doofuses. Like your Tom Brevoort, Jordan White, Nick Lowe, those kind of guys. Over at DC, the big name would be Ben Abernathy. He's the Batman group editor. What you'll notice when you look at these group editors at both companies now, which is different than it's been in the past, there's no writing talent there. Sure, they may have written a comic book here or there, but there's nobody that's ever really done anything significant. When you go look at DC Comics at their heyday at Batman, that 90s Batman when the character was really evolving and all those stories were really cool. You got all these different flavors of Batman, but they all worked. There's one factor that remains between all those. There's one name that's on all of them pretty much. It's Denny O'Neil, a fucking legendary comic book writer that apparently also was a good leader and a good teacher and was able to take the talents of a Frank Miller or of a or Chuck Dixon and others, utilize them to their fullest, and get amazing Batman content, all happening essentially at the same time, or at least around the same time. You go over and look at Marvel, and they've had several very good eras. This will be a little bit different, because Jim Shooter was like an executive level leadership. He was the editor-in-chief, but he was also a comic book writer, pretty significant comic book writer at that. He'd started writing for DC when he was 14 or 15 years old professionally. He'd written crossover events and stuff like that. So he was able to manage, John Byrne, Chris Claremont, and all these great writers that, Frank Miller, all working kind of at the same time. You don't have anybody like that at DC or Marvel right now. I'll give you a guess as why. It's because they don't pay enough. It's just not a prestigious position. And with the way that they've cut the editorial staffs, in DC's case, gutted the editorial staff, if you're the Batman group editor, you're kind of fucked. Who's going to take that job other than someone that absolutely needs it? That's not a destination position. If you want to be DC and Marvel need to make these great group editor jobs destination positions. The Spider-Man group editor job should be something that people are vying for to get in there and want to stay. And they should be populated by people, writers, creators that have been successful in the past, hopefully with the characters or that group of characters that they're working with currently, that have an ability to teach so they can get the editors below them better, and also improve the writing craft of the greenest goose shit writers and the really good illustrators that have no sense of how to actually do visual storytelling, which is absolutely lacking from both companies. You get a lot of cool pictures, but you don't get a lot of good visual storytelling in today's comic books. So you need someone that understands those things. And you need someone that, quite frankly, can be a bit of a prick. When I'm told Jordan White's the nicest guy, or is a nice guy, and he knows a lot about Marvel Comics history and their characters, but I'm also told he's an absolute pushover that does not know how to say no to a stupid idea. He does not know how to take a stupid idea, work with somebody, and turn it into a good idea. That's why we get Hellfire Gala. That's why we get Age of X-Men and stupid shit like that. You go over to DC Comics, Ben Abernathy, got to be overworked, right? Got to be way, way overworked with the amount of Batman stuff coming out there. Even so, it's still his job to maintain that universe. And you go look at Fear State, that thing was a clusterfuck. It's almost impossible to read coherently. It does not flow. I don't even know where the story begins and ends because it's not a very well constructed, conceived, executed story. So you need leaders that know how to write, know how to teach, and know how to say no, and help the editorial staff below them, your regular editors and your associate editors, and the writers and the artists below them, and help them improve their stories, work their stories out to where they make sense. There's logical breakpoints. You can actually get a comic book in there every once in a while. We don't get a lot of those nowadays. Now, Wes, how would you do that? Well, I can tell you right now, if DC Comics called up Chuck Dixon and offered him the Batman group editor job for the same rate and bennies that Ben Abernathy's getting, he's going to say no for a multitude of reasons. Number one, probably he doesn't want to fucking move. And the compensation's just not enough. So in order to make these positions, these group editor positions, when you look at Marvel, it would be the Avengers group editor, the Star Wars group editor, the X-Men group editor, Spider-Man group editor. You know what I mean? Over at DC, you probably need 2 group editors for Batman. A Superman group editor, Justice League group editor, a couple things like that. In order to get these, Black Label group editor. In order to get these things to work, you cannot pay the group editors as if they're Donny Cates or Jeff Johns or Scott Snyder, right? That's too much money. But the compensation can be high enough to entice somebody for a regular gig. That's you're on salary. There's a contract here. You have job stability. You don't have to go out there wondering, when this story's over, if you're going to get a paycheck. But it needs to be like, you have like your top 10% of writers. It needs to be just below that. You need to pay these people like they are high performing writers, but not the highest performing writers. For the most part, the people working under them should be getting paid less than them, including the creators, for the most part, unless you're working with a superstar. And you need to give them significant creative control or latitude to work with the creators underneath them and really give good direction. And after a while, obviously, you can take the hands off once you got people working. Everyone's kind of working in the same direction. But you're not going to be able to get a Peter J. Tomasi to come in as the Superman group editor with the way they treat the position right now. But you need to bring in a Peter J. Tomasi as a Superman group editor. And you know what the cool thing is because a lot of these guys are writers. You can say, hey, listen, well, you also have the ability to write maybe 2 or 3 miniseries a year, or maybe you can do an annual here or there, or a one shot kind of thing, and let them still do some writing work, but really concentrate on fixing the characters, fixing universes, improving the quality of the creators, writers, and artists, and improving the quality of the editorial staff. And everything will get even better over time. But initially, everything will get better almost immediately. When you have, some adult supervision, coming in on these teams with people that know what they're doing when it comes to the characters and executing stories. Over at Marvel, I would say, who would be a great Avengers group editor? Peter David. Yeah, he's surly or whatever. He can write. He knows how to communicate. And importantly, he has a little bit of that prick in him. He has the ability to say no. Or if you bring up to him a really, really stupid idea, like, I don't know, the Phoenix tournament, he can put you in your place and tell you why it's a stupid idea. And we can just leave that one, outside and get a better idea to work forward. But Peter David, you're going to need to throw him a little bit of money. And he can still work on his Maestro project on the side, or his Symbiote Spider-Man stuff. There are people out there that would be perfect for these positions, that have the communication skills, that know how to teach people, that know how to write, and know how to actually lead up to and execute an event, that know how to manage a work schedule. That would be perfect for these positions. But these are not destination positions right now. That's why you have the Legion of Doofuses in these positions, because they're low paying, high stress. Quite frankly, like, where are these guys going after this? There's nowhere to go. If you brought in really good people that did a great job and you gave them upward mobility to perhaps maybe you can go work on some of these streaming shows, or you can get in the writer's room, for whatever the next Disney Plus project is, or maybe you can get on the writer's room for a movie or something like this, and give them opportunities to really elevate themselves and improve their lot in life. Then these are destination positions. Once you start compensating them enough, once they start getting recognition, once they start getting the ability to handle their teams and know that there are brighter days ahead. Until you do that, you're stuck with Jordan White. You're stuck with Hellfire Gala. You're stuck with X-Men. You're stuck with Fear State, and that god-awful event where you have a DC Batman editorial team that is absolutely overworked and underappreciated what they're doing, and is quite frankly unable to execute at the scale that James Tynion and the other Batman writers needed them to be able to. They weren't even able to manage it through the writers. The editorial staff's supposed to do that. So that's the one thing that you could do. If you made the change tomorrow, you would see results as far as quality of work within 6 months. And if you got the right people, because they're at that right position, they could really affect the culture and make things better long-term as well. That's the way I would do it. What do you guys think? Is there something else that you think that you could do that would really, turn the tide for Marvel and DC and improve the quality of the books that we're getting and improve the direction that we have the universe is going in today. I'd love to hear from you guys too.